When I was drafted, I didn't even know I would end up in Afghanistan. That became clear later, already in quarantine. At the time, it was called a 3-month training course, and we recruits were called Bobrakas. No one really knew what that meant. Later, when I met guys who had already served in Grozny and gone through it, I heard that we were called suicide bombers. No one could explain why either. On May 1st, everyone who was not a member of the Komsomol was taken to join. There, when we received our Komsomol membership cards, we heard for the first time that we were going to Afghanistan. I don't remember who exactly said it, but then everything became clear. Of course, we had heard something about this country before, but we had only a vague idea of where it was and what awaited us there. My family found out about my service later, when I was on the road guarding a train. I think my sister was the first to guess and started asking for an answer, "Are you there or not?" And only after some time did I admit, "Yes, I am in Afghanistan." Our training was standard. We were in the 15th town, went shooting several times, trained at the Shaley training ground, ran, jumped, did pull-ups. We threw wooden training grenades. Overall, nothing particularly serious, except for the mandatory 500-kilometer forced march, which we completed as required. I remember the flight to Afghanistan. They put us on a huge plane divided into 3 compartments. At the time, I didn't know what kind of technology it was, but now I understand that there were powerful air conditioners. It was cool and even comfortable inside. There was a TV hanging between the compartments, and we watched some programs during the flight. But everything changed the moment the plane landed in Shindand. I stepped onto the ramp and felt like I had walked into a hot oven. I looked down from the stairs. Everything was black, weather-beaten faces, white Panama hats, burnt to gray. Here and there, something was exploding, shooting, bursting. And I thought, where have I ended up? I didn't even expect this. They lined us up right next to the plane and began to divide us into units. The plane was huge, but I didn't understand what kind it was at the time, as I didn't know anything about technology. After the distribution, we headed for the vehicles. I remember cartridges lying on the ground, right under our feet. I picked up a handful and said, "Comrade Sergeant, look, cartridges." And he just waved his hand. "Leave them alone, we'll get to the company, and I'll give you a whole NK." At the time, I didn't even know what an NK was. We arrived at the regiment. It wasn't even a town, but a continuous tent camp. There were tents instead of barracks, and a tent dining room that looked more like a metal hangar. There, they gathered everyone together again and announced another quarantine, only this time in the regiment. I stayed in quarantine for maybe a week and a half at most. Then I was assigned to a company, but in fact, I hardly ever saw the regiment itself. I didn't return there for the first time until almost a year later. Even now, when I meet up with the guys from my draft class, we often reminisce. Do you remember where the water pump was? Mish, vaguely. I also say, I hardly saw the regiment at all. Maybe I'll remember something if someone reminds me, but overall, it's just vague images. When I was transferred to the division, I remember more. We often returned from guarding the roads and stood in the park. The tankers left, and we were put on 5 minutes notice. That is, on combat alert. There were no tanks, but we stood guard for them. On the 2nd or 3rd day, they loaded us into 2 Ural trucks. One was filled with people with weapons, and the other was loaded entirely with ammunition. We young guys got into the trucks, and several veterans went with us. They joked that we were going to learn to shoot like Napoleon, but in fact it was real shooting. Ammunition was issued regularly, every month, I think, and it had to be used. So they gave it to us, and we spent the whole day at the training ground. We fired everything we had: automatic rifles, machine guns, grenade launchers. We threw grenades. I remember seeing anti-tank cumulative grenades for the first time and, in fact, for the last time. They were huge, like a 700-gram can of canned food, only with a long handle. The device was simple. You unscrewed it, a ring fell out, you threw it, and a parachute opened. And this whole contraption was supposed to pierce tank armor. We never understood why they gave them to us. Probably, they just needed to write off the ammunition. But there were no problems with that. Everything was organized perfectly. When I meet up with the guys now, we remember, we were given normal uniforms and good food. For comparison, my wife's nephew served in Moscow in the 90s. They could only dream of such supplies. The food we had was really excellent. Of course, we relied on dry rations, packages with meat and canned food. But at our stations, we always had our own little camp kitchen, a field kitchen. We cooked right on the spot, in addition to the dry rations. I especially remember the canned meat. We called it kangaroo among ourselves, as our seniors told us. I don't know if it's true or not, but the meat was delicious. It was clearly different from the beef we were used to, darker and with a different taste. In addition to our duties, we sometimes went hunting. However, they only started taking me with them in my second year of service. Before that, it was considered a privilege for senior soldiers. But I still have some memories from my first months. I hadn't even served 6 months when, before leaving for the target, my platoon sergeant, Murat from Kabardino-Balkaria, brought me to the tent. He was with Shoni, a Georgian. For some reason, they gave me the nickname Director. They said, "Take your clothes off." At first, I thought it was just a typical soldier's joke. Maybe they wanted to tease me. But it turned out that they had decided to accept me in their own way. They helped me, gave me a buzz cut, that is, performed the hands ritual. When I later showed the guys a photo from those first months, no one believed it was me. I had changed so much. Many people talked about hazing, but in my regiment, there was essentially none. I hardly lived there. Before leaving for the front, I spent a few days in the unit, and Murat took me aside and said, "Look, Yura," he said, "see those guys? They're washing dishes and cleaning the tents. Don't just stand there, go with them." That's how I understood that the senior soldiers wouldn't do this themselves. It was the duty of the young soldiers. We cleaned, washed, and did all the housework. At the time, I had no idea where they were taking us. I didn't really know where this country was. I had only heard that there was a war going on there. Everything became clearer later, when we took the oath and began to wonder why they called us suicide bombers. This was in the 15th town, in Grozny. It got to the political officer, and he came to us himself. Of course, he knew how to speak correctly. Yes, there is a war going on there. But if you are smart and careful, almost all of you will return home with awards. Don't worry, if you don't act like fools, no one will die. Usually, as they said, people died in Afghanistan because of stupidity. And, to be honest, in most cases that was true. I had 2 acquaintances, one older, the other very young. We called the older one grandfather. He looked so old that I thought he was over 50, although in reality, of course, he was younger. The other one was Kolya, a young lad. Both of them had relatives in the Afghan police. Kolya had a brother or uncle, and Manula, that's what we called the older one, also had a brother serving there. I remember once we went into a dukkan. That's what the locals called their little shops. There was a man sitting there, short, with a beard, eating. We were with Sergeant Kelov, a Ukrainian. We said hello. And suddenly this bearded man replied in perfect Russian. "Hello, guys. How are you?" And he spoke with a distinct Kursk accent. I was taken aback. Listen, he speaks Russian, and with a Kursk accent too. He smiled in response. "I'm from the Kursk province. My ancestors are from there." It turned out we were fellow countrymen. We talked, sat down, and drank tea. And from that time on, whenever I came to their street, I always stopped by his shop. He always greeted me warmly and said, "So, Yura, when are you going to Moscow?" By Moscow, he meant home, to the Soviet Union. And once he said, "I have a gift for you." It turned out that he had saved a 2-cassette tape recorder for me. But everything turned out unexpectedly. I was urgently sent to the regiment, and I didn't have time to pick up that gift. No matter how many times I visited his shop before, the tape recorder always stood on the shelf, and he repeated, "Not for sale." He always said, "This tape recorder is yours. When you go home to Moscow, I'll give it to you as a gift." In the meantime, every time I visited his shop, he would treat me to something. Sometimes it was cookies. They had a special kind, something like Oriental sweets. The dough was fried in oil and then covered with honey. They always had plenty of these goodies. We also had enough sweets in our unit. Condensed milk, cookies that were brought in by a mobile shop. They sold two kinds, round and square. I especially remember the square ones, which looked like a pack of Rodopi cigarettes and were even the same color. The lemonade in tin cans was called Sisi. I would take a pack, hide it under my bed, and that was enough to make me happy. We had no problems with sweets. I remember writing a letter home asking them to send me a photo of our house. After a while, a letter arrived with 3 or 4 photos inside. First, they took a close-up photo of the house, and then they had it edited at a photo studio. My mother, father, sister, and even my father's friend on a motorcycle were standing next to the house in the photo. It was obvious that it was fake, but for me, these photos were a real source of support. I missed home very much and always kept these photos with me. Most of the service consisted of guarding roads and escorting convoys. I don't want to say anything bad about the spirits, they had their own weapons. But we also had weapons that they frankly feared. Especially 2 types of shells, the V90 and the grape shot. It was these that the militants feared most. Our firing points were usually located every 50 to 60 kilometers, and each battery covered a section of about 25 kilometers in both directions. We were mainly engaged in guarding roads and escorting convoys. To do this, we were always on full combat alert. The command post was in constant contact to adjust fire, and the guns were at the ready. I can't speak for other batteries and units, but during my entire service in Afghanistan, while I was guarding the road in the artillery on the D-30 for a year, not a single convoy in our sector was fired upon. Service was rotational. Usually, a battery would be stationed at a point for 3 months. That's how it was with us. We arrived, served for 3 months, and began to pack up. We were to be replaced by millimeters, 100 millimeters anti-tank guns. We were packing up our guns. They drove in and set up theirs. The battalion commander gathered the personnel and announced, "We are staying for another month." We were only too happy. Hurrah! Then another month. In the end, instead of the scheduled 3 months, we stayed there for almost 7. I left for demobilization from that very spot. Later, I found out why they kept us there for so long. It turned out that the senior officers of the columns, passing through the division, began to write reports and memos saying that when the millimeters were in place, the columns were constantly coming under fire, but when the D-30s were in place, everything was calm and no one was shooting. To be honest, I didn't understand why these millimeters were needed there at all. Yes, I agree, they are anti-tank weapons and they hit further than our guns. They said that from 3 kilometers away, you could hit a hat. But our D-30s are just as good. The rangefinder determines the distance, we set the tube correctly, and the shell covers an area so that there are a dozen tops around the target, and it hits them all. The most interesting thing that I remember most is the story with the ZIL. Murat, a Kabardian, and I were returning from some kind of outing to the regiment, and there was already talk that a convoy was being assembled, and anyone who wanted to get to the Union had to assemble a ZIL 157. The car had to be in working order to travel from Shindon to Kushka, about 500 kilometers. And from Kushka to Murov it was even further, about 1,000 kilometers. In short, we had to prepare the truck so that it could reach the Soviet Union. Murat and I were excited by this idea and rushed around the regiment looking for any ZIL 157 we could find. But everything around us was empty. There was scrap metal lying around, but no intact trucks. And of course, we really wanted to get home. Then I remembered, I had once seen a blown-up ZIL behind the park, lying there without an axle. I said to Murat, "Remember when we were leaving, and there was a wrecked one lying near the park? It doesn't have an axle, but the body seems to be intact." I had an acquaintance, an ensign from Belgorod, a fellow countryman, who was in charge of a spare parts warehouse. Murat and I grabbed the 131 ZIL and drove there, behind the park. Sure enough, there was a car lying there. The frame, the cab, part of the body. The front end seemed to be missing, or badly damaged. We went straight to the ensign. "Comrade Ensign, do you have spare parts for the ZIL 157? And he just spread his hands. "Yes, my warehouse is full. I don't know what to do with them. You can't sell them to the Afghans, they don't need these trucks. It all goes to scrap metal." And indeed, he had everything: cabs, complete engines, axles. He just said, "Take what you want, we have everything." We returned to the company and reported that we had found both the base and the vehicle. We had 10 days left to assemble it. The battalion commander was skeptical. "Will you be able to assemble it in 10 days? The commander said, "I'll give you 3 young guys to help you. Can you do it?" "No problem," I replied. We got the people, took the vehicle, the very same ZIL we found behind the park, and brought it straight to the warehouse. There we started working. We rolled out everything we needed. We removed another old bridge and then installed 2 new ones at once. We installed the first complete engine, fully assembled, with attachments. We started it up, test drove it around the park. Everything was fine, the car was running, and we made it just in time. The only problem was that the car was driving along and suddenly stalled. At first, it wasn't funny, of course. We stopped and checked it out. It turned out that the fuel pump was overheating and had stopped pumping fuel. We pumped it manually and drove on. But you can't keep that up for long. First, we tied a rag to the pump to cool it down, but that didn't last long either. The rag dried out, and the same thing happened again. Then we found a rope. We lifted the hood, and the ZIL had wide fenders. We tied the rope to the pump, pulled it through the fender, and one of us lay down right on the fender, holding the rope in his hands. And so we drove. One drove, the other pulled the pump on the fender. Then we switched. To keep the cover from opening, we propped it up with wire. And we drove on. The funniest thing happened already on the territory of the Union. We were driving about 150 kilometers from Murov when we overtook a convoy. Turkmen girls in a GAZ 66 were going to pick cotton. At that moment, I was lying on the wing, holding the pump. I waved to them, they laughed and waved back. Then the road turned, and there was a hill. I shouted, "That's it, now I'm driving." And that's how we got there. We made it to the Soviet Union under our own steam. In Murov, we were met by the Belgorod guys. They often used to drive in convoys to Kushka for ammunition and supplies, so everything was already familiar to them. Well, then the most interesting part began: what to bring from Afghanistan to sell in the Soviet Union. Everyone shared their advice. Some said to take jeans, others advised batniks, saying you could sell them and make money. But my tent mate, Misha Kurilo, told me something else. "Yura, don't take any of that. Better to get some Afghan women's scarves. You'll sell them for much more. In Kushka, you can sell a couple for 25 rubles each, and take the rest further. There they'll be worth 300 to 350 rubles. I listened to him. Besides, we were only officially allowed to carry 3 scarves. We could put them in the glove compartment. But the guys suggested a trick. At that time, we had ankle boots, similar to today's combat boots, only we didn't know that word yet. I took off mine, went to the boot room, and took a larger size, 45 instead of mine. The boots were clean and in good condition. They could be used for hiding things. In the end, I collected about 15 scarves. There was also a restriction on glasses. You could only carry 1 pair on you. But I took 3. I put 1 pair on, put the second pair in the glove compartment, and hid the third pair on top of it. I distributed the scarves as follows. I put 3 in the glove compartment for officialdom, and hid the rest in my boots. When we approached the border, I put on the size 45 boots, in which I had placed the rolled-up scarves. We drove through without any problems. 15 minutes of inspection, and that was it. Well, we got to the Union, sold the hidden scarves, and I got 270 rubles. At that time, it was a crazy amount of money. Some of the guys had 100 to 150 rubles, but still, it was a decent amount. I was satisfied. My quick thinking had paid off. We drove the old ZIL 157s there, handed them over, and were supposed to get new ZIL 131s. But it turned out that not all the cars had arrived yet, and we had to wait a week, maybe 10 days. They put us up behind the Maras, that's in the Union, on the antenna field. There were huge antennas there, serviced by several people. One sergeant who had exceeded his term of service, a couple more sergeants, and several workers. They lived in one house, and 15 of us were put up in the second. Here, we had our first real outing in the Soviet Union. After Afghanistan, it was like a breath of fresh air. We were also proud. We handed over the old vehicles and brought new ones to the regiment. However, we later found out that only 5 or 6 of the vehicles remained with us, while the rest were sent to Kazakhstan to harvest crops. There, they were driven around the fields until the harvest was over, and then simply abandoned. What difference did it make to them whether they were transported in old 157s or new 131s? The main thing for us was that the unit had received additional equipment. Then Murov and I returned to Afghanistan, driving the new ZIL 131s. We crossed the border, received our weapons, and hit the road again. I remember passing the 13th kilometer of sand dunes, the place where our comrade Folka Kolesnikov died. Then we reached the 5th pass and began our descent. Right at the foot of the pass was a rock with water flowing from it, cold and clear, like the spring water at home. Spring water. In Afghanistan, it was especially prized. We were used to drawing water from wells 30 meters deep, and even that wasn't cold. We bathed in irrigation ditches dug 5 to 6 meters underground. The water there was cooler, but still not the same. And here, right from the rock, flowed ice-cold, clear water, cold as the spring water at home. Murat and I were already veterans by then. We felt at ease, as if the law did not apply to us. We could disobey the senior member of the convoy, and no one would particularly scold us. So that's what happened that time. We were coming down from the pass, and it was terribly hot. We saw water gushing from the rock. We stepped on the gas, overtook the convoy, and stopped the car. We dropped everything and ran to the stream. We washed ourselves, drank, and doused ourselves with ice-cold water. It was pure bliss after the stifling heat. We were about 6 or 7 meters away from the car, no more. Then we turned around and saw 5 or 6 spirits standing around the car, pointing their guns at us. Murat and I were barefoot and didn't have any grenades with us. That's when we got really scared. There was nothing we could do but slowly walk back toward them. One of them spoke broken Russian. "Water to drink. Harab. You can't throw away your weapons." I reached for my machine gun, and he hit my hand. "Harab bad." I felt a chill inside. I thought, that's it, it's over. Our convoy was already visible on the pass, but still far away, 1.5 kilometers, maybe less, but they wouldn't make it in time anyway. And then something strange happened. As soon as we said that we had come from the convoy to drink some water, the spirits suddenly disappeared, as if they had dissolved. They vanished in an instant. Our machine guns were left lying on the running boards of the car. We grabbed them, looked at each other, and there was no one around. We decided not to tell anyone about the encounter at the spring, but the column stopped anyway, and everyone filled their canteens with water. And then I shared this story with an ensign, a Tatar, a good friend. He listened and said, "Who could it have been? Who knows? Maybe the advance guard, those who are fighting on our side. Maybe scouts. They were young, like you. And indeed, they looked unusual. I met others like them later. I even have a memento from one of them. He gave me a rubber pad for my machine gun, soft and comfortable. The first time I noticed such a person was in a store. I walked in and saw a short guy standing there, seemingly ordinary, but dressed differently from everyone else. Jeans, a batnik jacket, a machine gun on his shoulder. But his belt was special, with a beautiful badge, covered in patterns. And his holster was unusual. The barrel wasn't hidden, the trigger was exposed, everything was visible. I was buying something at the time, and he came in without waiting in line. My hand even twitched. I wanted to push him away. But then one of the officers grabbed me by the shoulder and whispered, "Shut up. He'll kill you." I immediately realized that this was not just a soldier, but one of his special ones, with whom it was better not to argue. I remember another incident, on Talhaka. There, we almost got into trouble because of our stupidity. It was already dark. According to the regulations, you can't load a shell into the barrel in advance, because the charge and the shell are separate. If you do load it, then you can only fire. But we had a habit. We always kept the shell handy, next to the charge, with the wedge raised, just in case. Usually it was buckshot. We set it, if I'm not mistaken, to 5, so that we could fire immediately if necessary. The essence of the shrapnel's work was simple. The shell flies out of the barrel, flies a certain distance, explodes, and then a whole cloud of small metal needles flies out. The effect is terrifying. We usually rested during the day. Several observers stood at the upper points, and our own men were on duty in the center of the position. Our main duty was at night. We could approach the gun and bring it to full combat readiness in a minute or a minute and a half. At night, we were constantly at the guns, 2 people at each gun, so that we were not alone, but paired up. I was on duty with a guy who was 6 months younger than me. I can't remember his last name. I think it was either Puser or Licka. We sat by the gun, laid a mattress on the frame, lay down, and smoked. I was holding a cigarette, tapping the ash, when suddenly there was a blow to the gun shield. At first, I didn't even understand. I thought, maybe he threw a rock? I was about to tell him that I would respond with my machine gun. But he swore, "I didn't throw anything." And then there was a second blow, this time on a rock nearby. Then it dawned on us, someone was shooting at us. We instantly hid behind the shield. At first, we were confused, it all happened too suddenly. But then we remembered, we already had the shell next to us, everything was ready. All that was left was to send the charge, and bang! The first shot, a bang, and off we went. We started firing at the slopes of the mountain. Our positions were all around, and our neighbors immediately joined in. On the other side, a major joined the battle, or rather, a guy nicknamed Major. His real name was Gulin, Anton. He was from Odessa, and he got his nickname because his father was a major. He also fired at the mountain. Then Ivan started shooting. His gun was opposite us. And it turned out that he was firing across us, straight down the slope. We knew that if the piglet, that's what we called the shell, went the wrong way, a third of the shrapnel could fly straight towards us and hit our position. So we temporarily left our gun and moved to the Caponier, where we had an improvised gazebo, a camouflage net stretched out, with a table and benches made of boxes underneath it. We sat there, smoking, watching as they fired over us. The thought crossed my mind, what if a piglet falls on us now? And then, a red rocket in the sky. The commander calls. "What's going on there?" We report, "Nothing special, just shooting." In fact, we had a rule. If we wanted to shoot, it was not forbidden, but we had to call and warn that fire was being directed at the target. We didn't do that. In the morning, the commander came to us himself. He examined the gun and the shield. There were 2 clear dents from the hits. He said, "Okay, I believe you. You were under fire." Then we counted together. There were at least a dozen hits on our stones alone. After artillery preparation, we had a habit of climbing the mountains to check where the shells had landed. I really wanted to walk along the ridge myself. It's a pity I didn't have any film for my camera at the time. I would have taken pictures from above. On the ridge, we found a whole bunch of spent cartridges. They looked like they were from old English rifles. We also collected nails and fragments from our own needles. Another group of guys in 2 armored personnel carriers went around the ridge from the other side to check if there were any fresh enemy positions there. There was a dirt road above the mountain. I wasn't there myself, but the guys said they found fresh tracks on it, as if from a jeep. We climbed to the top and found a bunch of old stuff, but nothing serious. Thanks to my guardian angel, it could have ended differently. I remember we were walking through a ravine, not along the ridge itself. There were thorny bushes ahead. I wasn't walking first, I was second or third in the column. And suddenly, I don't know how, without any special training, my eye caught a tripwire. I shouted, "Stop! Where are you going? Can't you see?" I wanted to remove it myself, but the sapper stopped me. "Don't touch it. There might be a surprise." I was already about to cut the wire, but he forbade me. In the end, we turned around, and the tripwire was later removed and disposed of by specialists. It's a good thing I noticed it in time. These episodes are forever etched in my memory. I remember the whole journey, how we left the tents, how the sergeant checked us, then again, already in the regiment, then at the airfield. We arrived there, and they told us, the passenger plane won't be flying today, it's been postponed until tomorrow. They offered us a choice. If we wanted, we could fly on a cargo plane, an IL-76. But no one stayed behind, everyone rushed to the passenger plane. At that time, we were paid with checks, and rubles, Soviet money, were issued separately. We received this money at the cash desk when we left the military airfield. By the time everyone had received their salaries, it was already dark, around midnight. And so we left the airfield. The military and civilian airports were located at opposite ends of the city, and the journey was not a short one. Of course, there were no cars at that time of night. A crowd of about 300 people, maybe more, was walking across the square. Suddenly, a tram appeared out of the darkness, a carriage with a trailer. We all wave our arms and block the road. The tram stops. Behind the controls is a plump, short old woman. "Auntie, we need to get to the civilian airport." We ask. She replies, "Oh, my dears, I'm done for the day, my shift is over, I'm going home." But we start begging. What are we supposed to do, sit here in the square until morning? We explain to her that we need to get to the civilian airport urgently. At first she refuses. "How can I take you, my shift is over." But then she waves her hand. "All right, kids, get in." And so we crammed ourselves into these two tram cars, both of which were completely full, packed to the brim. We approached the airport, and instead of stopping at the stop, the tram driver stopped us right in front of the entrance and said, "All right, guys, we're here. Here it is, the civilian airport." The whole crowd decided to thank her. We each chipped in a ruble. And at that time, a ticket cost only 3 kopecks. She ended up with almost 3 times her salary in her hands. She was taken aback. "Come on, guys, don't, why so much?" We insisted that she take it. We entered the airport, and there were crowds of people. Tashkent Airport is huge, full of people. They immediately showed us where the military ticket offices were. We went there to get tickets. I said, "I need one to Kharkiv." And in response, "There are no flights from Tashkent to Kharkiv." Someone started buying tickets to Moscow, but we had been warned in advance about patrols. They said we could be detained in Moscow. A guy from Veluikov happened to be standing nearby. He said, "Let's buy tickets to Donetsk. It's a stone's throw from Donetsk to Veluikov." I agreed. In the end, the 3 of us, me, the guy from Veluikov, and another friend of ours from Belarus, bought tickets to Donetsk. We flew to Donetsk. I remember it was already evening, maybe even after sunset. We left the airport and had to get to the train station. We caught a red kopek, a regular Ziguli, and for 3 rubles the driver took us straight to the train station. There were almost no people at the station, the hall was empty, so we got our tickets without any problems. I bought a ticket to Veluikov, and our Belarusian friend bought a ticket for his route, as he needed to go in the other direction. Our train departed at 11:45 p.m., and the Belarusians' train departed after midnight. So we wouldn't have to lug our stuff around, we left it in a locker, briefcases, bags, everything. Then we went to look around a bit. The station was already closed, so there was nothing to do there. We went outside, and in front of the station was a wide alley lined with rows of benches, trees, and wooden kiosks. They were all covered with thick curtains. You go inside, and there's only wine. We had hardly tried wine before. In fact, the most we drank was beer, and even that was only occasionally. And here, I remembered how, back in Mary, when we were traveling, everyone kept talking about wine, wine, wine. We decided to give it a try. But the problem was that the kiosks didn't open until 8 in the morning. And at that moment, it was 6 or 7 in the evening. We walked back and forth, looked in, everything was closed. We came back at 8. An auntie, the owner, was just approaching one kiosk. We said to her, "Auntie, open up early. We only need a little bit." And she replied, "No, guys, I'm not allowed to. 8 o'clock means 8 o'clock." We tried to persuade her as best we could, but to no avail. We couldn't convince her. We saw her walking toward another kiosk. I said to the guys, "Okay, this one will definitely work." And indeed, the woman was plump and friendly, somewhat reminiscent of the tram conductor from Tashkent. We said to her, "Auntie, sell us some wine." She waved her hands. "Come on, guys. I'll get punished." We started begging, and then mentioned that we were from Afghanistan. And then her attitude changed. "Oh, you're from Afghanistan? All right. My nephew is serving there. Do you know so and so?" "No, Auntie, Afghanistan is a big place. We don't know everyone." "Never mind. I'll give you some wine, but I beg you, don't tell anyone. Otherwise, I'll be severely punished." "Don't worry. We'll never tell. It's not our way." She really did open the kiosk for us, gave us a bag and poured wine into it. She also added some sausage, several sticks of smoked sausage of different varieties. She didn't have any bread, so she gave us half of the loaf she had brought for her lunch. Of course, we happily paid her and didn't even take the change. We rushed to the nearest bench, sat down, and opened the wine. Then the first woman who didn't want to sell to us came out and said, "Get out of here, immediately." And we replied, "But you didn't sell to us, and when they come, we'll tell them that you sold to us." She clapped her hands, turned around, and left. At that moment, 3 more people approached us, 2 Belarusians and Boris Kuzmin from Gorky, our friend from the battery. We called him Kuzka. I was surprised. "What are you doing here? Didn't you say you didn't want to fly to Donetsk? There was another plane to Donetsk in half an hour. So we flew here." So, we were all together. We showed them our supplies, wine and snacks. We sat down, talked, laughed. It was a great evening. And then it felt like we were back home, in the Soviet Union. We approached a bar that was just about to open. It was about 100 meters away. The bar was still closed, the doors locked, stone steps. We sat down right on the steps, took out our wine and sausage. We broke 3 sticks of dried sausage so that everyone could have a piece. We sat there, snacking. And then 3 girls walked by, a little older than us, but young and beautiful. "Guys, what are you doing here?" "Well, we're on our way home from Afghanistan. We decided to drink some wine." They laughed and suggested, "Why are you sitting outside? Come inside, we have tables. Sit down at a table, otherwise the police will notice you here on the ring road." We went inside. It was a real bar, vodka and all kinds of drinks on the shelves, and various cognacs on the top shelf. We asked the girls, "Can we have that bottle over there?" "Guys, come on. It's very expensive, you won't have enough money." We just looked at each other in response. They didn't know that we had money on us, and quite a lot of it. At that moment, if I converted everything into rubles, including the checks, I had about 1,000. You could buy a motorcycle for that kind of money. And I was just a private at the time. The sergeants, of course, had even more. We showed them the cash. The girls' eyes widened. "No problem, but there was one condition. Pay immediately, no change." "Yes, please." We took what we wanted and didn't even take the change. The girls were happy. Then they did something clever. They hung a sign on the door saying, "Sanitary Day." And we said, "That's it. We're not working anymore today. We've had enough." And we sat inside, laughing, time flying by unnoticed. It seemed like we had only spent a minute there. Then I glanced at my watch. Our train was coming soon. The girls said, "We'll see you off. Come back sometime." Well, who knows if it would happen again or not. I already felt then that in Afghanistan I could talk on equal terms even with officers. But here, at home, everything was different. There were those who behaved frankly incorrectly towards me. And I, of course, couldn't keep quiet. When I returned home, I quickly realized that things weren't the same anymore. Something was missing. I remember when I was flying out of Afghanistan, climbing the stairs to the IL-76, I spat, "Damn you, may I never return here again." But after a while, I suddenly felt drawn back home. In 1986, I was working in the Housing and Utilities Department on a powerful field machine. One day, I walked into the office and saw a notice, 2 people needed in Afghanistan. The military registration office was just a stone's throw away, so I ran there. I saw Izvekov sitting there. When I left for the army, he was a major, but now he was a lieutenant colonel. I approached him. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, here's the notice." And he immediately swore at me. "What, you want to serve?" He knew me well and respected my father. Then he calmly added, "You want to serve? I can send you to officer candidate school for 6 months, and then you'll get a good post in Germany." "No," I said, "I don't want to go to Germany. I want to go there, to Afghanistan." But he replied firmly, "You won't be going there anymore." I didn't understand why at the time. I only found out many years later, in 2016, on Tankman's Day in Prokhorovka, where I had come for a regiment meeting. Tank officers were also celebrating their holiday there. We got talking, and one of them let slip that there had been an unspoken order not to send anyone who had already served in Afghanistan back there. There were no official documents, but it was categorical. And then I realized, yes, I had changed a lot during my service. I even remember the exact date, August 1st, when Kolesnikov died. It was on that day that I realized I had become a different person. No one ever said that to me directly, but I heard that some people were told, "You've changed." Perhaps they knew how I would react, so they didn't say anything to my face. I always reacted too aggressively to such things, and I don't know how I would have behaved if I had heard it directly at the time.